Welcome again, everyone. This is the second panel of the fourth annual Freedom Convention Turkey, which is titled as Turkey's International Law Compliance and Spotlight on ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, and United Nations Developments. In this session, we will delve into the potential impact of utilizing ECHR mechanisms and UN channels for positive transformations in Turkey in terms of human rights, obviously. And on the occasion of Human Rights Day today, we aim to deepen understanding of Turkey's multifaceted challenges and present strategies for effective engagement with the global human rights community, amplifying our collective voice and advocating for those in Turkey who are suppressed by oppressive regime of Erdogan. And I am planning to start with Johan Heymans. Johan Heymans is our first speaker today, and I want to thank all the speakers, amazing speakers, distinguished speakers for joining us today. And our first speaker, Johan Heymans, is an international human rights lawyer. He serves as the managing partner of the law firm We as Advocacy, located in Belgium. Johan has been actively involved in addressing Turkish human rights issues for several years. He has conducted proceedings before the UN Human Rights Committee, the European Court of Human Rights, the International Criminal Court, and played a role in establishing the Turkey Tribunal and Opinion Tribunal. Recently, he acted as one of the counsels for Mr. Yalçınkaya, advocating his case before the Grand Chamber of the European Court. We know you as Yalçınkaya lawyer in Turkish community, Johan. You're very famous. And thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours. Do you want to share your screen?
I don't think it's necessary to share it.
Okay.
I will just explain it. I will follow a little bit by nose, but also speak from the heart and from experiences, so that I will recall. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me here, Hafsa. It's very good to be here and to talk about the situation that is currently still going on in Turkey. The aim of the second panel was to talk about the vital role of global organizations and the collaborative endeavors that we could use to uphold universal human rights. And I think that is a very important topic. It's also a very frustrating topic from time to time. And so how I will try to address my speech is by going through a little bit the history, because Yalçınkaya is one case, but this is a struggle or a fight that we have been doing for many years, since 2016. And Yalçınkaya is just the last step that we have taken, but it will not be our final step. But we have also taken a lot of other steps before, and I think it's interesting to see what kind of walls that we hit, opportunities that we saw, and how we try to create pressure from all different sides on an international level by using all these international organizations that you have that can make a difference, trying to push Turkey back towards a rule of law system, which it has lost for a number of years now. So just perhaps to start it off, as I just said, we started with this discussion or with this situation since 2016. And in the beginning, we defended clients that were in Turkey that, of course, because of the flagrant human rights violations that they had, immediately tried to go to the European Court on human rights, because they thought that that's the way or the place that their human rights violations would be tackled and that they would receive decisions in their favor. But that was not at all true. The European Court, even if it was very clear the human rights violations, was kind of hiding behind the domestic remedies exhaustion that you needed. And so a lot of people lost a lot of hope by going to the European Court, and also wasted a lot of time hoping that the European Court would decide on something that it for a long time never really did. we also filed applications. We also hit the wall and also received the information that we should go back to Turkey to litigate over there, which was an illusion to do so. The reason that we got from people within and around the European Court, what they told us, is that there were two reasons why the European Court kind of refused to deal with this situation. The first one was that they hoped that Turkey would go back to normal, that it was a brief time of chaos, and that then the rule of law would return. But after a number of years, it saw the European Court that was not happening. The second reason is more of a political reason, and that is also important to understand when you're working with these international organizations or tribunals, that it's never just about a law, it's also about politics and everything that goes with it. And there was also the fact at that moment, particularly, that you had this refugee crisis that was going on in Europe, and that Turkey was a very important partner of the European Union at that moment, holding back all these refugees, and that not many European countries, and therefore also not the European Court, dare to really go too hard on Turkey, and so they abstained. A last reason that we also sometimes heard is that just the number of cases was too massive. I think at a certain moment in time there were at that moment 8,000 active cases every year being added to the European Court just against Turkey, which is incredibly massive if you consider that the European Court only takes a fraction of that number to decide every year. So that also the European Court was a bit reluctant because they feared it would take too much of their capacity to do so. No, so that was a first attempt that we did. It was very disappointing, but we didn't stop there. And so then we went to another tribunal, the United Nations Human Rights Committee, when we had the opportunity in 2017 when two or three people, but in the end we litigated for two, Mr. Ocelik and Karaman, were kidnapped in Malaysia by Turkish Secret Service military group and brought back to Turkey. Two people who were working as teachers and an academic for a number of years there. And that was also good, and it's also important, I think, to remember is that when the door is shut in one institution, perhaps the door might be open in another institution. That was really the case with the United Nations, because they didn't have this struggle of a refugee crisis or less in any event, because we filed the application on the 12th of May 2017, and a week later, on May 19th, 2017, we already got provisional measures in which the United Nations Human Rights Committee imposed a number of conditions on Turkey that they needed to comply with, basic human rights that should have been granted to our clients. So we litigated for a number of years, and there also you see how the different organizations kind of influence one another, because you saw that Turkey initially thought, well, this is easy because the European Court always said that you have to go back to Turkey to litigate. We will just try the same thing using European jurisprudence to make sure that this case does not move forward. And there is also how things work. You need to, if a European Court does not want to move, you need to try to find other lawyers, other judges, other institutions that kind of build a platform, a support that the European Court judges do not feel that they are the pioneers, that they need to go after incredibly difficult decisions just by themselves, but that they are supported by internationally other institutions. And so here the United Nations Human Rights Committee did not accept these exhaustion of domestic remedies arguments, and they forced Turkey to also talk about the substance of the case. And there is also interesting to see at that time in 2017, when you read the ruling that eventually intervened of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, that was in 2019, the 28th of May, you will see that even there we were talking about BILOC, Bank Asia, being part of trade unions or associations. So the same kind of arguments were already in a very basic manner, of course, because at that moment we were mostly discussing Article 9 of the ICCPR, which concerns the arbitrary deprivation of liberty of our clients. But even there, the United Nations Human Rights Committee was talking about the same arguments that eventually in the Helsinkaya case, I will come back to that in a moment, that resurfaced and really have been entered into this Grand Chamber decision. So there we put the first steps into these arguments, always coming back, Biolog, Bank Asia, trade unions. You can kind of make a very easy scheme. 99% of the cases in Turkey in that context have the same arguments and the same heavy sentences that are imposed on these same arguments. So there in 2019, United Nations Human Rights Committee said, yes, this is a problem, and they sentenced Turkey. They gave them, and that's also important, they gave them 180 days to remedy similar cases. So not only the case of our clients, but also similar cases. And therefore, and also in the opinion itself, it also put a number of key principles regarding to the rule of law in Turkey and the lack of rule of law in Turkey. And once more, it's kind of European Court does not move. And by going to another institution, we put basic principles that we used later on in the Helsinkaya case to really force the court to move into a different direction than it did before. Also, in that regard, I think it's important to emphasize that the case before the United Nations was useful, but was not sufficient, in the sense that it's not because of that decision, it's not binding, that suddenly everybody or the other Turkish judges started respecting this ruling, came to different decisions. Our clients were released quite rather quickly, but still they were convicted to quite heavy sentences. And of course, Turkey did not comply after this decision. There were new kidnappings, there were new abductions. So it is not like it completely went back to the rule of law. That is also something that is important that I've learned over the years. That is about a constant pressure that you need to apply by making sure that in the end, a country goes back to a rule of law. It's never about swift, quick wins. It's you can lose it very quickly, but it takes a long time to regain a rule of law. So we had that decision. It was not binding, but then we felt that the momentum was kind of slipping. It's something that you see in many different international conflicts or conflicts internationally, that the attention kind of disappears for a certain situation. And therefore, we decided to create in 2021, in September, a Turkey tribunal, which is an opinions tribunal, where we gathered experts and also witnesses on 5 different topics on human rights abuses in Turkey. It was about torture, abductions, impunity, freedom of press and expression, and judicial independence. And the meta question that we asked, because all these different reports were presented by different people, were supported by testimonies, evidence, and so on. And this was all presented to a panel of former judges of the European Court, and also judges internationally from South Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, and so on, to present to them in an independent manner different human rights topics, and to get their opinion about this. The meta question that in the end we wanted them to answer was, are there crimes against humanity being committed within Turkey, yes or no? And they came to that conclusion that there were crimes against humanity being committed against Turkey. What is the importance of that tribunal, in my opinion, is first of all, it gave hope to a lot of people, and it gave them a platform to show the world that they were not forgotten, because many people, because of the attitude of the European Court, felt a bit lost and lost their hope in international human rights bodies. And this kind of gave it back to them a little. It was also followed by a lot of people. 2 million people in total were following what the tribunal was doing, and most of them in Turkey, of course. And what is important is that it brought together a lot of different human rights victims. for a very long time, and that is also something that I've learned. It doesn't matter where you're from, what your origins are, what your political opinions are. It's all about human rights. And if you're a victim of human rights abuses, you need to gather and unite to try to put pressure on the abusers to rectify their attitudes. And so that is also something that happened there, because from all different sides and origins, people gathered in that tribunal to show what they were doing. And that will briefly bring me to two other initiatives. The International Criminal Court, because we filed a complaint on the basis of the opinion of the Turkey tribunal. We filed a complaint on the 1st of March 2023 against a lot of perpetrators of these crimes. A preliminary investigation is still going on, which is good. And we gathered a lot of evidence, a lot of information that we submitted to the prosecutor, and we're still submitting it today once more to make sure that people don't forget, the perpetrators, that there will be justice coming one day or another. It's not about evading this or escaping it. It might take us some time, but we are coming, and the impunity will come to a stop at a certain point. And that is also what happened in a first step, I would say, in the Yalcinkaya case, which you, I think, already discussed extensively in the first panel, where the European Court finally, in a Grand Chamber decision, made a number of very important statements and withheld a number of important violations on right to a fair trial, no punishment without a law, freedom of association. But in the end, it all comes back to the scheme that I was just discussing, BILOG, being part of associations. Bank Asia is not really mentioned, but in a way, it's just the same thing as what the European Court already withheld in the Yalcinkaya case. And most importantly, and that's a very big step, is that the European Court now finally considered, it took them a long time, but that there is a systematic problem with the Turkish judiciary, and that the rule of law in Turkey is kind of lost, and that Turkey needs to take steps in that sense. Now, that's a good thing, but for me, the real work starts now. Because Yalcinkaya is a good decision from the European Court, but now the next step is make sure that it gets implemented, because that is a struggle that we have seen in the past, not only in other different cases too, that Turkey is not necessarily complying. At the moment, we see that national decisions go a bit in all directions. You have some judges who take it into account or trying to do something with it, and you have other judges who are completely ignoring the decision. But I think it's really important for people now that they push their cases, that they ask to reopen their cases, even if they have been convicted, if they are still litigating, that they use this decision to ask their judges to reconsider their case, so that we get as much movement and pressure as possible also within the system, because we know that a lot of Turkish judges are following these developments very closely. Why? Because they feel that also their responsibility is not non-existent, that in the end they might also be held accountable for not complying with the basic principles that every law student knows that you should respect, and that some judges have not been respecting in Turkey for a number of years. And then also we are also exercising a lot of other pressure through different initiatives, through the Committee of Ministers with whom we are in contact, who are supervising the implementation of decisions of the European Court. And then we have also a lot of other things that are going on at the moment, universal jurisdiction cases against perpetrators, and another session of the Turkey Tribunal that is coming up. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and that is my conviction. It is about constantly applying this pressure and making sure that the human rights victims are not forgotten, and that the human rights institutions keep on pressuring Turkey to come back to the rule of law, that in the end we will make a difference. But it is a work of a very long effort. But I think that Yalcinkaya and all the other things are good steps in the right direction. But on the other hand, there is still a lot of work ahead of us, and that is by working together with a lot of different people and institutions, that in the end, I'm a positive person. So in the end, I think we will really get back to a rule of law system. and that everybody will have an opportunity to reivindicate the rights that they should have been granted for many years now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johan. So actually, you shared really important, invaluable remarks. I see that there are different paths in terms of, pursuing justice, both in, domestic arena and also in the global arena. And you said that with the ECHR, with the UN, it's not always about laws. Yes, it's about laws, but there is also politics side of it. So when you knock on a door, if it's not, open, then you should go to another door. There are lots of other doors. Maybe you have to go around and around, but as far as I see, you have never given up. So thank you so much for your efforts. And you talked about your efforts in United Nations Human Rights Committee and taking different aspects of the violations, which is also very important. BILAC, Bankasya, being a member of associations and different articles. And what you get is actually very important. If there is, no law, then there is no crime. It's a sample case. It's not just about the Yalçınkaya. It's about hundreds of thousands of people.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
It's very important that the real work actually starts now. But I'm going to come to that point after all the speakers, because this is very important to, to elaborate on. And our second speaker is today Sinam Mohammed. Sinam Mohammed was the founding co-president of the People's Council of Rojava, Syrian Kurdistan. The People's Council was founded in 2011 during the first term of Syrian opposition uprising, and operated as the supreme political body of the liberated areas of northern and northeast Syria. This governing body is now known as the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, ANS, and is known as the authority associated with Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. Mohammed now serves as the top diplomat of the ANS. She currently serves as the chief of the U.S. mission of the Syrian Democratic Council in Washington, D.C. She's a leadership member of the Star Congress Movement for Women's Rights. She was twice nominated to run for Syrian parliament in 2003 and 2007 during the Assad regime's rule, but couldn't win because of her Kurdish identity. Mohammed was born in Damascus, Syria, and received a degree in English literature from the University of Aleppo. She's married with 4 children. Actually, we are colleagues, Sinam. I got my, BA and MA in English language and literature, but now I'm standing on a totally different position, just like you. So the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hafsa. Thank you for everyone here. And it's my honor today to be in this room with all of the significant panelists today, actually, and to discuss a very important topic, as today is the International Human Rights Day. All the world, they are celebrating that day. It is the word celebrate, that means the freedom of here, dignity, freedom, women rights, and the justice all over the world should be seen. But unfortunately, even now, after it is now the 75th anniversary of the declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but still we see a lot of the violation and the crimes committed in all over the world. And I will talk, Mr. Johan talks about, inside Turkey, what's going on, or how the Turkey would compliance to the international law. I would also say something, that Turkish government or Turkish regime is not only inside Turkey have some violation and committed crimes, but even outside Turkey. Let me see, in the other, crossing the borders. So I am from the northeast Syria. I'm particularly from Afrin city, which my city has been occupied by Turkish, by the military operation in 2018. And that time, we used to have the autonomous administration in Afrin, or now it is in all northeast Syria, which depend or based on the human rights, based on the gender, equal genders, based on the freedom of religions. This is what we are working on in our autonomous administration in Northeast Syria and in Afrin before 2018. So we have the women participation in all the institutions. We have the equal gender, that means we have 40%, the quota of the women participation in each institution in the autonomous administration, which is very, let me say, changes in what happened before the 2011. Unfortunately, in 2018, when Turkey occupied this Afrin, they committed a lot of crimes, and still it is going on. It doesn't stop. It's committed by either by Turkish or by the groups, military groups backed by Turkey. So we always see that Turkey is occupying this area, so it will be responsible for any violation or any crimes committed in this region. So all the fundamental freedoms that everyone has to, it is his right to have it, but we can see now a lot of crimes is going on. For instance, in Northeast Syria, the truth about the Turkish violation, Turkish regime violation for the international law in general, and violation of the spirit of the United Nations Declaration of the Human Rights in particular. All this must be revealed, must be shown to all over the world. So since the occupation of the Syrian lands, I said in 2018, Afrin, and later on 2019 in another part of Syria, like Ras al-Ain, Sarikamiya, and Tel Aviv. Since these military operations, there was, as I mentioned, a lot of crimes and has happened in violating the international law and committed a lot of crimes. So if we classified all these crimes, it would be under the Article of 7 in the United Nations Declaration, and Article 9 also. That means against the humanity, killing the people by drone attack, which is still continued till now in the Northeast Syria. Destroying the sources of life, which considered also a war crime. When recently in October, 5th of October, when Turkey bombed 80% of the infrastructures in the Northeast Syria, depriving the 5 million people from electricity, water, schools. When they bombed the schools, they bombed the water station, the electric station, the oil station. All this has been bombed, and now many people now, they are suffering and because of this. Unfortunately, we didn't see any condemning to this violation. Unfortunately, everyone turned blind eyes to what's happening. And I think, as Mr. Johan said, that there is not only human rights law, but sometimes they will go to the political issues that related to political issues. So in Northeast Syria, when they destroy the source of life, it is a war crime. It is a war crime, according to the Declaration of the United Nations. When they siege all the people there, and now the aim is to have the, sieging on the exterminations, torture, racial segregations. It is like that, depending on the Kurdish or the democracy. This is what's going on, actually. Forced displacement. In Afrin, when we have 300,000 be forced to displaced from their home, from their city, from their properties. Me, as a personal experience, I have it with my family. My family, my children, all they were in Afrin in 2018. Now they are displaced and they are in the camps living nearby Afrin. So imagine. So all this, I mean, like forced displacement, it is a war crime, according to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So through these practices, actually, Turkey is supporting the terrorism in some way, indirect or indirect way. For instance, in the terrorism of ISIS, everybody knows in northeast Syria, we have liberated, as our forces in the northeast Syria, Syrian Democratic Forces, they could liberate this area from the ISIS, which everyone knows that they commit a lot of crimes against the women, raping the women and using the women as a slaves, sexual slaves. Until now, we are suffering from that. We have many people, have the women being missed now. Nobody knows where are they. So they are, in this case, whatever Turkey is doing in Syria and in northeast Syria and in Afrin, we have now 1,000 women missing. We don't know where are they. They were in the jail only because they were working in the autonomous administration. So there is some crimes happening, but really nobody hear about that. Nobody knows that if you want to destroy, genocide is going on in Africa. Destroying the nature that is against the human rights. When you are cutting off all the trees, you are turning the green area into a desert. What does it mean? Is it not a war crimes? It is. But who talk about that? Who raised the voice against that? We didn't hear anyone to stop it. What is going on that Turkey is telling that I'm not doing that. It is Syrian groups, military groups, but these groups, they are backed by Turkey and they will not move and will not act without the approval of Turkish regime there. And this is what's going on now. So when we Turkey doing all these things, that mean they support the terrorism of ISIS in some way. Even till now, we defeated ISIS geographically, but still the ISIS sleeper cells in the northeast Syria are there, still exist. Daily, we have many operations against the people there from the sleeper cells of ISIS. So this is also, if we leave, we keep silent, that means these terrorists of ISIS will resurge again, come back again, and commit a lot of crimes against the humanity and against the women and all the people there. So the Turkey in this case, it is preventing the international efforts actually to achieve the goal for the United Nations to international peace and security. The aim of all to have the international peace and security. By this act, Turkey is doing the opposite. When you are doing all these crimes, you are destabilizing the region, you are destroying the sources of life. So where can the people, many ISIS sleeper cells will be working in recruiting the new young people in order to give them some money, and because of the economic crisis in the region. So this is what would happen. So we will see a new resurgence of ISIS coming back, and this is against also the international law for the human rights. So I can hear, I want to say that in Afrin, there are still the former leader of ISIS has been seen there. The former leader of Al-Qaeda, HTS, Jabhatul Nusra are there now. So do we want to see again the ISIS or the terrorist group, radical extremist group, again coming back to the region? I don't know if they want to see it. That is, the questions for all the international communities. So for that, I call the international communities, even the United Nations Assembly, General Assembly, to hold the responsibility for all these crimes that happen and to cease fire now, because Turkey always is attacking the region. Till now, just yesterday, before 2 days, the drone attack, they are targeting the women. They are targeting the leaders of the autonomous administration. They are targeting the leaders of SDF who fought against the ISIS and destroyed ISIS. This is what they call. So for that, I call on for prosecutions of Turkish state for its international crimes committed there, of the aggression, genocide, occupation, and crimes against the humanity, and holding accountable for all the people who perpetrated all these war crimes. And even I can just say something. Now, the people of Afrin who are forced displaced to a region which is called Al-Shahba, there are more than 100,000 people in the camps. They are now suffering because of the lack of petrol, the lack of oil, and the lack of electricity, and because it's so cold. Just today, a child, he lost his life because of the cold. So is it not a human rights violation? It is. If these people go back to their city, to their country, that's what we need. So we ask the international committee to ask Turkey to get out of this, and to ask this group who are committed the crimes there very accountable. Even there, I would mention one thing. 2 military groups in Afrin, they are Al-Hamzat, it's called, and Abshat, because of our here activity in the United States, in the Congress, and in all the administration here, people, there was a sanction, there has been a sanction, American sanctions against these 2 groups. But what is the result of the sanction? They are still there, they are still continuing their crimes, they are still committing crimes, they are still taking ransom from the people, they are still violating all the human rights and international law, even though they are sanctioned by United States. So sanction is not enough. You should act more. You should stop them. You should make them accountable. We should actually ask them to get out from this, and so that the original people of this city go back to their houses and their, I lost a lot in my city, Afrin. I lost them. So how can we imagine you are living in a very peaceful house and with your family, suddenly you will lose everything, you lose your house, you lose the business, you will lose your properties, and you have nothing now, just in the camps. Who can accept that? Why? Because of what? Only because it is a Kurdish region? In Afrin, of course, we are in Syria. We don't interfere in the political issue inside Turkey. We are working as the Syrian Democratic Council for the Syrian people to have a political solution and a process of the peace in Syria. This is what we are doing for. But we have the Kurds in northeast Syria and in Syria. We have the Arabs. We have the Assyrian Syria Christians. All of them are together working in our region. We don't have any differentiating between the Christian and Muslim. No, we don't have any differences between Arab and Kurd. No, we are working on such a system that we are all together as a democratic system, pluralistic system, decentralized system in Syria. This is what we need. Unfortunately, Turkey doesn't like that. They don't want such autonomous administration and always try to invade the region again. So I would like to highlight about many of the organizations in Europe human rights organization working on Afrin issues, actually, and they gave to the European Court, many cases, but they heard nothing, as Johan said. They heard nothing. Why? Because of the political issue, maybe. So when can we see the European Court will be, taking care of all these crimes and stop this, so that we need to have the trust again in the international law. We need that. If the people in all over the world seeing that all the crimes has committed, all the crimes have been again committed for the women, raping the women in Afrin, imagine, and killing the women there, killing the Kurdish women, force them to leave their city. Is it not a war crime? Yeah. So when we see that all this happening in front of the eyes of all the world and nobody take any action, that time the people will really, we don't need actually that, but we don't want to lose the trust in the international law. This is what's going on. Because I'm hearing from my people when they call me, they say, nobody care about us. What's going on? Where is the human rights organization? Where is the international, the United Nations, declaration about the human rights? Is it just by words? No. So for that I say, we need action. We need action to have the trust again in the international community. We need action to have the United Nations Declaration of the Human Rights today for 75 anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights to be activated, not only in one part of the world, in all over the world. Not only, for instance, a human rights violation, yes, committed in Ukraine, committed in Israel, committed in Palestine, committed in everywhere in the world. But sometimes you can open your eyes for some people, but you close it you have the blind eyes for the other place in the world. And this is what we don't want to see it. So this is why I can here just stop. And again, thank you so much for your invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sinam. I can tell that you are really, speaking from your heart. And unfortunately, as a person coming from Turkey, and this session is, our organization is basically focused on Turkey, hearing that Turkey is not just, threatening democracy and justice, not only in, its borders, but also beyond borders. That's really sad. And you talked about crimes against humanity that is conducted by Turkish regime and also ISIS, or sometimes, militia backed by Turkey's regime. And you talked about attacking the infrastructure and women's rights, violations, sexually assaulting women as well in Afrin and other parts of, northern Syria, the Kurdistan. And you said that sanctions are not enough. And as I just told Johan, I'm going to come back to that point later on. And thank you for your remarks, Sinam. These are really, really, really important to hear once and all the time again. Now we have another person coming from another part of the world, the United States, Andrea Barron. Andrea is the Advocacy and Communications Program Manager at the Torture, Abolition and Survivors Support Coalition International, based in Washington, D.C. She prepares torture survivors, mostly from Africa, to testify at meetings in the United States Congress and the State Department about torture and human rights abuses in their countries of origin. We are also working with Andrea, thanks to her, even if Turkey is not in her, table as a focus point. She's helping with the victims of torture in Turkey too. She leads a national campaign to pressure the U.S. Asylum Agency to interview asylum applicants who entered the U.S. legally with visas and have been waiting 7 or 8 years for an interview. Andrea was an adjunct professor of history at George Mason University from 1999 and 2000 to 2015. where she taught courses on Middle East history and global women's rights. She's a leader in Jewish-Muslim collaboration in the Washington, D.C. area and a long-time activist for peace between Israel and Palestine, which is very much needed right now, maybe more than usual. Thank you, Andrea, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Hey, so first I want to thank Hafsa for inviting me, and I learned a tremendous amount from Johan and Sinam. So I've got to catch up in a lot of research on some of the things that you said. Thank you very much. I really, really learned a lot. So as Hafsa said, I'm the Advocacy and Communications Program Manager from the Torture, Abolition, and Survivor Support Coalition, or TASC. It was founded in 1998 by Sister Diana Ortiz, an American nun who was abducted and tortured by the Guatemalan military in 1989. Our mission is to end the practice of torture and empower survivors. The advocacy program trains survivors in the Washington, D.C. area and nationwide to share their stories with Congress and the U.S. State Department to influence U.S. policy to their countries and prevent torture there from continuing. We also, as Hafsa mentioned, we advocate for asylum applicants who entered the U.S. legally but have been forced to wait many years. They cannot get an interview with USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Most of our survivors are from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Cameroon, Sudan, Uganda, and other African countries, and a few have come from the Middle East, Iran, Egypt, and Jordan. We at TASC are appalled by the ongoing torture, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrests, and other human rights abuses carried out by Turkey, especially since the attempted coup of 2016. Turkish President Erdogan has targeted Kurds, leftists, and activists in the Hizmet movement, some of whom I've met here in the United States. I want to share one of the stories from a June 2022 Advocates of Silence Turkey report that I cannot forget. Mehmet Eren was a teacher persecuted because of links to the Gulen movement. In October 2016, he was detained for 9 days in a police station in Afyon in Western Turkey. He was electrocuted on his back, his kidneys, and his genitals. He said that Teoman Yaman, a police officer, threatened to have him raped with a baton if he did not reveal the names of people behind the coup. Mehmet, himself an observant Muslim, said that the police tortured him like it was, quote, their religious duty, just like INT'L does. He was referring to the terrorist organization, of course, better known as ISIS. London Advocacy, a nonprofit in the UK, surveyed and interviewed 30 torture survivors who had applied for asylum there. In its December 2022 report, interviews described various types of torture like beatings, sexual harassment, the threat of rape, sleep deprivation, threat of torture of relatives, enduring naked bodily searches, and extended periods of solitary confinement. Who were the torturers? They were military officers, police, intelligence and security service officers, paramilitary and embassy staff. It's very sad to read that doctors, nurses, and other healthcare staff were complicit in the torture, either through direct action or neglect. In October 2022, the European Commission said, quote, credible and grave allegations of torture have increased in Turkey. So here in the United States, we heard a lot about torture in Turkey, after the attempted coup, but I had not read very much about it lately in the press in the United States and had no idea that it was ongoing and actually has increased. Even though 7 years have gone by since the attempted coup, I was really surprised by that. The Norwegian Ministry of Justice said that Gulen is a particularly at risk of arrest and imprisonment. I also took a look at the State Department's 2022 Human Rights Report, which said, according to the Human Rights Association in Turkey, prison authorities actually encourage prisoners to commit suicide, and one even gave a prisoner a rope to hang himself. So here's an example of the U.S. State Department documenting this kind of torture. So it's not like people there are not aware of it, but there isn't enough focus on it. I was not aware of this until I recently read the report. As Hafsa said, I mostly focus on countries in Africa where our survivors are coming from, but I took that right out of the report. Followers of the Hizmet movement and Kurdish activists were not the only Turkish citizens victimized by police. Participants in Istanbul's Gay Pride March and their lawyers were also detained and mistreated by police. 2 women lawyers were sexually assaulted. So just like Sinam Mohammed said, wherever there's torture, you can always see that there's going to be women who are raped. And there are some cases, there are male rapes also, even though the men are more reluctant to talk about it, that happens too. Turkey ratified the Convention Against Torture in 1988 and the optional protocol to the convention in 2011. But it's very sad to read that ratifying these international treaties has clearly not made any difference in eliminating or even reducing the practice of torture, not only in Turkey, but many other countries that have signed these international treaties. In fact, we just heard, as we heard, the European Commission said that torture in Turkey has increased since the coup in July 2016. Turkey's not the only country engaged in torture that ratified the Convention Against Torture and then continued to allow military and intelligence officials to practice it. According to a fascinating article, and I'm not a lawyer, but I got through this article, published by the Yale Law School professor, Una Hathaway in 2004, titled The Promise and Limits of the International Law of Torture. She said that countries that practice torture often join the convention and other human rights treaties to attract more foreign investment, aid donations, and other benefits, but they continue to practice torture. So although, of course, I applaud Johan and all the work that international lawyers have done, but some countries, not only Turkey, are using these conventions to improve their, quote, reputation while they continue to practice torture. International lawyers should continue demonstrating how Turkey is violating its commitments against the Convention Against Torture and other international human rights treaties. But an additional strategy is for Turkish survivors in the US and Europe to share their experience with policymakers. This is what the Task Advocacy Program has done for over 10 years. These are mostly private meetings with Senate and House committee members. They're not public. People do not have to publicly reveal their names. Nobody knows who they are. We've also had a few public meetings with the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, but those are a very select number of survivors who are willing to show themselves publicly and feel comfortable with that because they're, of course, worried about repercussions against their families back at home. But what I want to suggest is there can be private meetings that nobody knows about where people can also talk, Turkish survivors in the US, or even if they didn't survive torture, they're victims of human rights abuses, and they can share their stories with aides that will listen to them and empathize with them. So here are some of the stories that Task has had, as we've had. There's a story of an Iranian man who was tortured in Tehran's notorious Evin prison because he filmed demonstrations against the fraudulent election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in the 2009 Iranian election. He was sentenced to death and only released because of some comments made by then President Barack Obama about political prisoners in Iran. There's an African woman, and I'm not even going to mention her country, but I met with her. She was just granted asylum, and I met with her in New York City 2 weeks ago to congratulate her for getting her asylum granted. She was not a political activist, but she was caught by a spy, a woman who taped her criticism of her government. She was dragged to the police station. A major put a gun to her head and raped her. And she was a victim of female genital mutilation, so the rape was even more painful. So it's very difficult, even when I talk about her, it's difficult for me to talk about it, but she was willing to testify. And the people who she spoke to, they weren't going to do anything about her asylum. They had nothing to do with the asylum agency, but she wanted them to know what happened to her, what her country had done, and to try to prevent torture and rape of other people in her country. So the policymakers expressed sympathy for Task survivors that testified before them. Sometimes survivors have even influenced US policy, particularly in the case of Ethiopia. They also appreciate that their testimonies are taken seriously even though they are not US citizens. So I heard again and again and again how amazed they were because in their country, they could get arrested, dragged, tortured just for opening their mouth and criticizing the government. But here they are in another country in the United States. And these are some of the good things about the United States. There's a lot of criticism, but these are some of the good things that people who are not US citizens, who haven't even yet been granted asylum, can get a hearing by important people, not just, so they're very excited that these are important people in the US Congress and the State Department, Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights, who will listen to what they have to say. So this is just one small suggestion about how to highlight ongoing torture and other human rights abuses taking place in Turkey, and also to allow these Turkish asylum applicants to participate in the struggle against the abuses in Turkey going on every day from a safe country. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for the work that you've been doing for a long time. And thank you for all your remarks. And you know, you've been talking about torture and torturers, not only victims, but also perpetrators that have to be considered within such a discussion. And you said that I believe that you just, looked at the reports on torture that is, happening in Turkey. And you said that torturers are police, paramilitary, secret service, intelligence agents, which are government, officials. That is scary, actually. And that's it. That is also, like Sinam is talking about, or, Johan is talking about. This is crimes against humanity. And also you said that when there is torture, it's always women first, unfortunately, because, women are used as, war weapons everywhere by everyone. And that you're reminding it's not people aren't aware, they are. The United States is aware, the European Court of Human Rights is aware, the United Nations is aware, but we have to always, again and always, bring attention to these issues, because there is politics, there is other stuff, there is arm deals, there is a lot of stuff that politicians consider first. But we have to bring attention to human rights issues again and again, without giving up. And we also, you also highlighted the importance of testifying and, making sure that if those victims don't want their names on, in public, there are opportunities, ways that it can be confidential, but also going testifying. Please, please, please keep in mind, I'm telling the audience here, this is important, that because personal true stories are much more important sometimes than reports. Thank you, Andrea, for that. And last but not least, Paridi Singh from the United Kingdom. Paridi is a legal officer in the media freedom team at the Thomson Reuters Foundation, helping scale up legal support to journalists and newsrooms with a focus on Central and East Europe. Paridi trained as a solicitor at Baker McKenzie LLP and has worked as a management consultant at Accenture UK. She has lived and worked in several countries, working in human rights, education, and international development, including with the United Nations Development Programme, I think in Sri Lanka, and the Center for the Study of Democracy in Bulgaria, Journalists and Writers Foundation in Turkey, and as a research scholar at the University of Parma, Italy. And Paridi, as the youngest member here in discussion, I must say that we are proud of the work that you've been doing. It's just like John, I think you are the youngest members. Thank you for what you've been doing, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hafsa, and good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where it is that you're joining. It's very much evening here in London, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to you all and share this space with you on the occasion of International Human Rights Day specifically, and also to talk about Turkey. So I do have a presentation, so I'm just going to share screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see this presentation. Do let me know just by...
Yes, we see
okay.
it well. Okay.
Perfect. So my presentation is specifically going to focus on weaponization of the law, particularly in the field of media freedom. And I'm going to come to the agenda now just so you get a sense of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what the work of the Thomson Reuters Foundation is, and what trust law is within that, which is specifically given the context in which we are having this discussion, that is the role of international organizations in advancing human rights everywhere. And one of the things that the Thomson Reuters Foundation does is use its platform Trust Law to facilitate that, specifically for journalists in the context that I'll be talking about it today. The second thing I'm going to be talking about today is spotlighting on one of the reports that we published earlier this year, which is called Weaponization of the Law, Attacks on Media Freedom. And this report actually specifically talks about the state and the scale globally of attacks on journalists, media outlets, and independent journalists using alternate media, such as podcasts, radio, photojournalists, and the kind of scale of legal attacks and threats that they are facing, some of which have been spotlighted in a different context, in the context of human rights defenders today, but I'm going to kind of deep dive specifically in the media freedom space. I'm also going to talk about my personal experience of working at Journalists and Writers Foundation in Istanbul in 2015, which was a year before the failed military coup attempt in 2016, and how that personally impacted me and my development as a lawyer. And also I'm going to talk about resources that you can signpost, because I'm conscious there might be people in the audience today who know someone who might still be undergoing certain kind of, legal threats, particularly if they are journalists, whether they are within Turkey or they're outside Turkey, and what some of the resources are that we can provide, of course, to help with that. So let me just, this is the kind of agenda of what I'm going to talk about, but let me just take a step back and talk you through why it's so important to talk about freedom of expression, and particularly journalists and media outlets in the context of international law and rule of law and democracy. So basically, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we're the corporate arm of the Thomson Reuters news agency. Some of you might know it as Reuters. And one of the things that Reuters does is, of course, we support is to support kind of raising awareness of human rights issues, and particularly kind of being the kind of check and balance and accountability mechanism for democracies. So the three pillars with which the foundation was set up to kind of, empower was media freedom, human rights, and inclusive economies. And today I'm going to be talking about media freedom. And the reason for this is really simple. It's because freedom of expression and free speech is in fact a litmus test or an indicator for how well the democracy is functioning. Ultimately, democracy is about informed decision-making, where citizens know and have access to the information to make decisions and to vote on important political topics, including who's going to run the country and how a country should be governed. When this very important checkpoint of democracy is attacked or targeted or silenced, which is something that we have seen emerging globally and is something that is rapidly on an increase, as I'll talk to you about in the report section, there is a direct detriment to the quality of democracy in that country. And once democracy is disturbed in a country, it impacts absolutely everyone within that country, whether that's individuals or corporations or civil society organizations, but more specifically, it impacts those that are on the front lines, and often in the frontline war against, kind of preserving democracies are human rights defenders and lawyers that are protecting human rights, and freedom of speech kind of proponents who are journalists and media freedom outlets. And so that's one of the kind of context within which Thomson Reuters Foundation does its work. So I've already spoken about sort of the why and the importance of free, fair, and informed societies. And basically what the Thomson Reuters Foundation does is we have this expertise that we get from the Reuters news agency, which is the kind of corporate arm that does like investigative journalism, media development. And what we do at the foundation is support this work, not just for the Reuters company, but also globally for media outlets and journalists. So this is like in three folds: strengthening local and national journalism through training. So trainings around like information around freedom of speech laws in a country, and how to, for instance, publish stories so that there is less of a likelihood for them to be caught out by defamation laws within a certain country. Improving media ethics and standards. So what should be the kind of, robustness and rigor that goes into producing a piece of investigative story, and also exploring, shaping, and thought leadership around what media freedom should look like in democracies in the 21st century. So we do this through lots of different things, but as I mentioned, one of the things I want to talk about is trust law, because this is really important. So trust law is the pro bono legal assistance that we provide for what that does is essentially we connect social enterprises and non-governmental organizations, including media outlets that are not for profit and journalists, to high quality legal members, which tend to be typically law firms. And the aim is to basically provide this in a pro bono, so free legal assistance. And in doing so, we empower and enable smaller organizations to be more robust and to be able to kind of access the legal help that they need. We have a community of more than 6,500 members in over 190 countries. So our network is vast. We work with Turkish organizations as well, including within Turkey and those that are exiled out of Turkey. So really, like there's like a lot of help that the organization can provide, particularly if it's in the context of legal help. And I'll come to the specifics now. So in terms of what kind of assistance we provide, so we provide assistance with legal issues relating to daily operations. So for example, if for instance, there is a case of a Turkish journalist that had to now be exiled and they're working from a Belgium office from a newly set up organization, then what would that employment contract look like for this employee? That would be the kind of advice we can provide. So this would be more your day-to-day legal operations, things like setting up policies, data privacy policies, gender policies. So how kind of an organization is run. So really this is more about making sure that the organizations are set up in a way that it's less likely for a government that might be hostile to really catch them out on these kind of things, which might, on paper seem less in comparison to the threats that media outlets and journalists face in terms of torture, physical abuse, etc., but can still be equally important because these kind of speak to the overall like legal robustness and resilience of an organization. And the second is the kind of threats we provide is more legal research centric. So for instance, if there is like a particular concern about how law is used in different countries that an organization with a wider footprint wants to look into, then that's something we can assist into that. Again, connecting them through law firms who would provide this representation or kind of this help pro bono. We've also done a lot of work specifically in the field of media law and human rights. And I'm telling you, I'm kind of telling you more about this work because I think it's important to realize that the problem of targeting of journalists is a global one. So for instance, India is one of the hotspot jurisdictions, which is a country where I come from. And we've recently produced a Know Your Rights guide for journalists in India, which basically is the guide to provide user-friendly, practical guidance for journalists and newsrooms seeking to understand their rights and protections in India. It's available in English and it's also available in Hindi. So we do tend to provide our guides in multiple languages to make them accessible to a wider audience. The next slide also talks about some of the work we've done recognizing intersectionality. I know this is something, Andrea, you touched upon as well, and Hafsa, you mentioned too. Certainly, we see a kind of disparate impact of targeting of journalists on women journalists in particular. And one of the kind of key trends that has arisen in a lot of the women journalists is being targeted online. So there's a lot of like online abuse that female journalists are subjected to, often of very graphic and sexual kind of nature. So one of the things that we've done is kind of build a Know Your Rights guide when in kind of like a kind of go-to guide for when female journalists are being targeted and attacked in terms of what they can do to kind of have greater access to online safety and security. And we specifically developed this with like working with journalists in African countries and also working with journalists in the Middle East. So this is something that is also cross-jurisdictional. It doesn't just look in one jurisdiction, but these guides are aimed at empowering women journalists in multiple jurisdictions. And so now I come to the second part of my kind of discussion for this evening. And I think this is the part which I really want to focus on, which is the weaponization of the law, attacks on media freedom. So this was a report that was published earlier this year, April 2023, and we developed this report in collaboration with the Toll Center for Digital Journalism in Columbia University, US. And the aim of this report was really because as an organization that looks at how journalists and freedom of speech is faring worldwide, we noticed that there was an increasing pattern of attacks on legal journalists. And while some of these were quite kind of explicit in terms of physical abuse, torture, and detention, we also were noticing that there was a pattern of more inventive and innovative use of using legal threats against journalists, and also non-legal ways in which to target journalists, such as using Pegasus spyware, which is an Israeli software that targets kind of information and is used to spy on journalists. And that was something that, in the case of Hungary was clearly being used as well. So we saw a spectrum of patterns emerge, and on the back of this report was published. So just for for context, there's a record number of journalists which are imprisoned worldwide. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at the end of 2022, there were 363 journalists that were jailed. Turkey has been condemned for violation of Article 10 ECHR, which is the freedom of expression article in the European Convention of Human Rights, for over 154 times since 2000. It is also regarded as the largest, according to Human Rights Watch, the largest jailer of journalists worldwide, with an estimate 150 journalists in prison in Turkey at the minute. Since the failed military coup attempt, more than 200 media legal outlets have been closed. More than 40,000 websites have been targeted and shut down, which were publishing things that might have gone against the president or the state and the kind of governance at large. And this is just few of the many statistics that highlight and spotlight what the situation is like in Turkey. One of the other things, apart from the direct physical abuses that's there in Turkey, is also the social media laws, which make it really difficult to publish things that might be considered anti-state or anti-precedent. And there being kind of very specific rules that have been brought in to kind of monitor online publication of news, etc. as well. But I want to take this and make this also a global discussion. So this is a pattern that we've seen worldwide. So for instance, it was also estimated that so I'm just going to go to the next slide, that one of the things that we did to produce this report was we polled journalists in over 106 countries. Now, most of these journalists are part of our alumni network, so journalists that are directly part of Reuters organization, or journalists we have provided legal trainings to over the last many years. So as part of this survey, we had 47% response rate of the people who said that their media organization have experienced legal threats as a direct result of their journalism. And our survey responses included a total of 493 journalists from several countries. So this is a really robust piece of research, and I really encourage anyone who's interested in finding out more about what's happening specifically in terms of weaponization of the law to target media freedom, to just do a quick search of this report. You'll really be blown away by the kind of scale and global kind of impact of what's happening. So in terms of the key findings, and this is a really, really important finding. So the report examined and highlighted 8 direct legal threats against global media. Defamation came to be the number 1 legal threat, which is basically accusation to journalists or media outlets on the basis of kind of personal insult or injury. And the key thing to know is defamation in a lot of countries is a criminal offense. So people can go to jail for it, and often it is one that is used to kind of target journalists and media outlets. States are using also a general pattern of criminalizing criticism and social unrest and defining it really vaguely so that it has a greater catch-all element. One of the things that is also there is the national security and public order offenses to convict journalists. This is one we've particularly seen in Belarus and Russia, where journalists are targeted by, kind of saying in terms of, they're a threat to national security. And also, of course, there's also like accusation of terrorism, that if someone is saying something against the state, they are accused of being terrorists, and that's used to also target journalists. Clubbing is another tactic, and this is something which we've seen targeting media outlets. So one of the media outlets in Poland, Gazeta Wyborcza, which was criticizing the outgoing political party, they had over 100 lawsuits against their media outlet. Most of them were frivolous, not founded on legal grounds. And this is like, kind of quite a common tactic, that you just bury these organizations in so many legal threats that they are so, their capacity is so reduced by financially and legally fighting these threats that it sucks away their energy and time to do actual journalistic work. So I'm just gonna, I've spoken a bit about defamation and insult already. Like I said, this is one of the top threats. I'm not going to go into all 8 threats because that will take up a lot of the time, and I'm conscious I want to leave some time at the end of this presentation for resources. But I did want to touch about slaps. So slaps are slaps are not really new. The journalists, human rights defenders have been targeted by slaps for a long time. But what we have seen is a rapid increase since 2015 in the number of slaps that is usually brought against media media outlets and journalists. So SLAPs are strategic lawsuits against public participation. They are usually groundless, meritless, and they are brought about as a way to target individuals and to kind of silence individuals. And the way that they typically work is that usually it will be on the ground of defamation, but not necessarily. Sometimes journalists are accused of just random things like financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, as a way to discredit their credibility. And in doing so, they are used upon as a very kind of effective tactic, not just by government like politicians, but private institutions as well. Particularly in the case of Brazil, we've definitely noticed a pattern of like private companies and like heads, like really, rich CEOs of private companies, bringing in these lawsuits against those that are criticizing perhaps some of their deforestation activities in the Amazon as part of their commercial exercise. So it's not just something that governments are using, but even rich private companies are using as a way to silence independent media. I'm not going to go into there was a short video, but I'm not going to go into it because I want to come to counterterrorism, which is something I spoke about earlier, and have a video here of Can Dündar, who is a journalist from Turkey, and I hope you can see the subtitles. I'm sorry, I don't think we have voice, unfortunately, due to technical reasons. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what that looks like in terms of direct impact on use of some of this weaponization of law in terms of the life of a journalist. And I think this also speaks to what Sinam was talking about in terms of reporting on the wider cross-border actions of Turkey, and even that having consequences under local laws. There are certain key recommendations, and a lot of this, to be honest, is more to do with the media outlet or a journalist house and what they could do to avoid such litigation and such sort of vexatious law claims or kind of legal threats to their organization. I think one of the kind of key things to focus here is that, as you might have also heard from what Johan was saying earlier, is high quality legal representation can make all the difference when you are faced with the scale and enormity of legal threats. And that's actually one of the things that A, costs a lot of money, and B, can be really hard to access when you yourself are being targeted and you're, say for instance, not in the country in which you're being targeted also. So I think one of the really kind of key things that the organization, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, tries to do is to bring about, create an ecosystem where they can directly provide this kind of help to journalists and media outlets. And I'll come down to those resources towards the end before I just briefly touch upon Journalists and Writers Foundation. So I was an intern in 2015 at Journalists and Writers Foundation, which is now exiled in the US. But at that time, they used to have an office in Altunizade in the Asia side of Istanbul, for those who know how Istanbul is set up. And I remember at the time I was still a law student. I was studying in India, but I was doing my semester exchange in Hukuk faculty in the law faculty at Koç University. I remember at the time, doing kind of like normal work of the organization supporting journalists and writers, but also like more generally focusing on youth development, empowerment of women. And then I finished my internship and I came back to India to finish my undergraduate law studies in 2015. And then 2016 happened, and a lot of the people that were really good friends of mine. So just for reference, this is now my personal views. This is not the views of Thomson Reuters Foundation, the organization. But I was really surprised by how quickly things can change. And I think that's the thing that really caught me off guard, because I realized when I was reading the news about this, I messaged some of my friends, ex-colleagues I was working with at JWF to check how they were doing. And a lot of my calls were not responded, and a lot of my messages did not reach them. And so I was really kind of desperately trying to find out what's happening on the ground. And for weeks I didn't hear. And ultimately, a lot of the people that I was working with emerged later on because they had to flee effectively overnight because they really were fearful for their security and safety. And so luckily, most of the people I know, they're in good places. They obviously cannot go back to Turkey, and they managed to kind of seek asylum and settle in different places through their networks. But I think this was really instrumental in shaping me as a young lawyer in this experience. And I think particularly, even despite being a lawyer, I remember feeling quite disempowered in that situation to be able to actually offer help to people in need. So I think it's so important that the ecosystem of international organization, international lawyers, and also any other kind of mental health support, victims of torture support, that there is this real sense of safety net that can be provided to individuals who are undergoing something like this, because honestly, things can change so quickly, and it's so important to know how to be able to kind of provide help quickly and efficiently as possible. And so on that, I come to resources. So I'm just going to quickly touch upon 3 resources that you can have access to, and then I will wind up. So essentially, we have the Trust Law portal. So this is the portal where you can either voluntarily sign up. So this would be for media outlets, journalists, and also NGOs that are looking for some sort of legal help. Maybe you've received a defamation lawsuit, or you've received some sort of a complaint or letter or anything of the sort, which makes you think, oh, I don't really know what to do, and I could do with a little bit of legal help. That's precisely what we're there to do. We work globally. It's also there for lawyers. So Johan, I do hope that you will sign up as well, because we could really do with more legal help and expertise. But it's for whoever wants to do more pro bono work and make really meaningful impact in this ecosystem. I should mention that we don't just work in media freedom space. We work on all sorts of human rights issues, women's rights, access to education, etc. But in the context of today's presentation, media freedom is one of the things that, if you're interested in, this is the way to go. This is a really practical tool. So if you are someone who is active on social media and is, because of the nature of your work, targeted by online abuse, we have a filter at the foundation, because obviously we have a lot of journalists who work at Thomson Reuters who kind of can be subject to this kind of abuse. And it just kind of helps you block some of the hate content that you might be getting on your social media by filtering it out. So it's a really good kind of add-on to add if you use social media. And this is the really critical one. So the Legal Network for Journalists at Risk. Thomson Reuters Foundation is one of the 3 steering committee members of this network, which includes big media organizations like Committee to Protect Journalists, Media Defense. If they're working Article 19, if they're working in the freedom of expression universe, they're part of this network. And the idea is to provide a single point of entry to the media defense ecosystem for journalists who are facing legal threats. So the idea is that a journalist can just self-refer, or if you know someone, they can self-refer, and then you'd be able to access high-quality legal representation through one of the kind of organization members who can help provide that. And that is all. So thank you so much for listening. And I am very, very delighted to be able to offer any help if you'd like to connect afterwards as well.
Oh my God. I'm losing my breath, Paridi. It was a very, zipped and very informative presentation that you touched on how journalists and media freedom are targeted by especially dictator and authoritarian regimes, and how media and free speech is weaponized by those regimes. So I want to go on with my questions, but I would like to ask you, since we have 8 minutes, can you please answer those questions mostly in 2 minutes, and then we can wrap it up. So Johan, how will we help or urge Turkey to implement such international judgments? Because you said that, the real work starts now. How?
But I think that so what I said is that a lot of people need to ask to reopen their cases and to really invoke the judgments. I think that there is, from different sides, that you can put pressure. The first manner is through the judges themselves, that they auto-regulate in a way. If a number of judges in Turkey start to follow this decision, then the colleagues not following the decisions will feel under pressure to also start complying with the decision of the European Court. And at the moment, we see that a number of judges are complying with the Yasin Kaya case, while others, of course, are not doing so. So that's one way. On the other hand, also internationally speaking, you need to put pressure. And you do that through the Committee of Ministers. So all the ministers gather to look how the implementation of decisions is going of the European Court. Well, also there it's important to lobby, to be present, to make sure that everybody within this committee knows what is going on with regards to the ideas of the Yalcinkaya case. And then lastly, I think that also people, if they feel that they are not listened to by the European Court, that they need to go to the European, by the Turkish judges, that they need to go to the European Court again with the violations that they have been facing and that the European Court has already decided upon. So it is about putting pressures from all different sides, and Yalcinkaya is only a part of the solution. All other different initiatives, United Nations, opinions tribunals, and so on, they also remain open and need to be used to put movement into the attitude and the policy of Turkey not complying with the rule of law.
That's very informative. That's what I actually wanted to hear. But highlighting these, submitting personal cases, Turkish people, persecuted people are a bit hesitant to submit their cases, but actually it will accelerate, the process, right?
Of course, yes. So there's people who are still being prosecuted at the moment in open cases. Well, they need absolutely refer to the principles of the Yalcinkaya case, because if they don't, it blocks them in the future to go to the European Court. If you have not raised the violations within your domestic procedures, you cannot go to the European Court asking to come to that violation. So that is important. But also we have a lot of people and clients that have been convicted. They have already executed their sentences. Well, also these people need to ask to reopen the cases by saying, look, you made mistakes. The European Court said that you cannot convict me on this basis. And even if in the end the result is the same, or the judges, they just reject your request to reopen the case, the fact that a lot of people are requesting the domestic judges to reopen the case because they want the principles of Yalcinkaya to be respected, that is really important, because as a judge then, every single day you need to acknowledge and know that you're not doing your job and that you're ignoring principles of the European Court. And it is by pressurizing also the judges in a way, legitimately and legally pressurizing them by pointing them towards their legal obligation as a judge. And that is important, because at the moment a lot of people have given up, or they think it's not worth it, but it is worth it. In the end, it's about taking all these little steps, and all these little drops will in the end fill the bucket.
Absolutely. Thank you for your answer. And Sinam, you said that sanctions are not enough. You said action. We need action. What should we do for those persecuted people of Kurdistan?
Yeah. So I think there is a lot of issues we have to do it. As Johan said, we have to go to all the sites, to different sites, not only to one site. So here in the United States, actually, we are educating and giving all the documents, what's going on there, either to the Congress. So we need the Congress to help that in congressional legislation order, in order to stop or to get these groups out of the, for instance, the occupation area, and stop the occupation of Turkey beyond the border. This is one of the issues that we would be work on that, and we were working since long time. And there is another issue, is to educate even through the media, all the medias, they have to know what's going on there, not only with the closed door, with the Congress or whatever, but media, they have to also know about that. So if in media, like here, for instance, we have a lot of newspaper and TV and all this, it would be good to work on that, and even that to have the relations, or to have these acts with the international court, the European Court, International Court, to reach the United Nations for the Human Rights Commission there, I think it works. It makes some differences because a lot of work we did it here. For that, the sanction has been, I mean, these groups have been sanctioned in our field. So it is a step, it is the first step. So we need the other step, stronger one, so that you can stop all these violations which going on in Syria, in northeast Syria or in Afrin or all the occupied region, which is Turkey is responsible for that. Turkey is an occupation country, and the occupation, it should be responsible, not only the groups who are there, you know. So I think it is the responsibility of the Turkish regime about that. So for that, we have to work on this, not only for the group also.
Actually, you're right. You know, because of the politics, you know, going around the world, sometimes Congress or other places, you know, disregard what's going on in terms of human rights. So we always bring attention to what's going on, and we have to collaborate. Actually, you know, maybe we just pay attention to, you know, what's going on in, you know, borders, within the borders of Turkey, but such as this conversation coming together, what Turkey's regime is doing, you know, in and out of Turkey, and also educating through the media is very important. Social media, actually, I believe, is the, you know, very much beneficial platform to, you know, raise awareness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea, is your organization helping only people in the United States, or, for example, if there is one person in Europe, in a European country, who somehow was exposed to torture, subjected to torture, and wanna, you know, testify or, you know, raise awareness or speak up, is there any way to reach out to you and get help?
Unfortunately, no. Yeah, so basically what happens is we're a small organization and we serve the direct services. We also have a legal aid program, social services, mental health, and that's only for the people that live in the Washington area. And I expanded, I'm one person with 2 interns in the summer. So I expanded the advocacy program throughout the United States. One of the things we possibly could do, but this is not the same as quote unquote, helping individual people with their cases, is if we do get information about people who have been tortured from other countries, you know, if there's like a lot, we could write an article, put it on our website, maybe get them some attention, some congressional aids. But to be very honest, people, a lot of times we get comments or emails from people abroad that think we can help them with their cases. So I'm not a lawyer, and our lawyers are only working on asylum cases for people who live in the Washington, D.C. area applying for asylum in the United States. That's what our lawyers do. So, but if we get a lot of information, you know, for example, about people who in Turkey who have been tortured, who are victims of other human rights abuses, you know, we could kind of put together maybe an article and put it on our website. We could do that. But I don't want to promise people we can help them with their individual cases, because we can't.
No, you're right. Actually, I was trying to understand if maybe, you know, any other organizations, sister organizations, or, you know, doing the same job in European countries that you can, or Africa or other places that you can, you know, refer to.
I would contact the larger groups. There's HIAS, HIAS, which is a refugee resettlement organization, very, very well known, HIAS. And there is the Lutheran, I think it's called the Lutheran Immigration Organization. Now, these organizations also are going to work primarily with people here in the United States, but they will be familiar maybe with international organizations. In the UK, you must have heard of this, Paridi, it's called the Freedom from Torture. It's an organization, you've heard of that, yeah. So Freedom from Torture in the UK. And if you give me specific countries, Hafsa, if you send me an email about where you have Turkish asylum seekers or whatever in specific countries in Europe, I can identify where they could go to. And people, but they also should mention, what are they looking for? Are they looking for lawyers to help them with their asylum claims? Are they looking for counseling? Are they looking to become part of an advocacy campaign? So where they are and what they're looking for. And then I will see what I can do to help.
Actually, no, that would be a great help, and I will do that. And that maybe we can, share them on social media or on our website. Maybe some people, want to speak up, in confidentiality, of course. And again, last but not least, Paridi, are you providing only legal help or also funding, maybe, finding jobs or, scholarships, that kind of stuff?
So predominantly Trust Law is a legal help provider, and so that's what we do. But for the journalists in specific, we are aware that a lot of the journalists, particularly those that are in exile or media outlets that are transitioning to exile, need hands-on support just to get them up and running. So there are some of our funded projects, particularly in Central and East Europe, for instance, where we have helped provide even things like a budget for an office studio, to have a production room, for instance, and also some of the other support, such as in terms of funding specifically. So funding to cover cost of legal litigation costs in some instances, and also costs associated with legal advice, like access to legal advice, particularly if that advice is not available pro bono, so providing it on a low bono basis. So that's something we've done in the Africa jurisdiction, in Kenya and also East Africa. So I would say predominantly we are a legal service provider, but in some instances, and particularly for media outlets and journalists, we do provide some funding support subject to eligibility criteria of our donations and the kind of donor funded projects. So for anyone in the audience who would like to find out more, they are very welcome to get in touch with me, and I can kind of do that internal check on how we can provide support.
Yeah, maybe we can do some, additional addendum kind of, conversations on YouTube. I have a, platform on AST's YouTube channel. Maybe, we can provide more information. And thank you so much, everyone. It's been a very meaningful, some information sharing, experience sharing, and, uplifting spirits and energy and, encouragement. Thank you so much for what you've been doing, and thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for being such a great moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Have a great, day, night, morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Hi.
you. Bye-bye.